Hello, everyone. Good day, good evening to you all. It's a pleasure to be here today. I hope that I'm coming through clearly and that you're able to understand what I'm sharing here today. But as was shared in the introduction, my name is David, and this is a subject that I'm very passionate about. I've kind of worked in the career space for a number of years. I've made a lot of hiring decisions. I've interviewed and conducted coaching sessions for hundreds of times, believe it or not. And I've learned a lot along the way. And so for the next hour or so, we're going to discuss how to win in a behavioral interview. Behavioral interviews have become increasingly more common in the hiring process, especially for jobs that require specific skills, technical background, and competencies. So understanding how to prepare for and perform well in behavioral interviews can significantly increase your chances of landing the job you want. So the goal of my presentation today is to help everyone here understand the basics of behavioral interviews and really provide you with some key strategies for success. So before we get started, I want to do a quick icebreaker here, and you can type your answers in the chat if you don't mind. But on average, I'd like to hear from you all. How many candidates do you feel apply for each job posting? A, 93, B, 118, C, 59, or D, 41? Feel free to type your answers in the chat. I'll give you a minute or so. Well, I don't see any. Oh, there's a question. Let's see. Okay, I see someone says D. Well, that's okay. The correct answer on average is B, 118. So this is according to Forbes magazine, that on average, each job posting, specifically here, I should preface, here in the United States, there's around 118 applicants for each posting. So whenever you apply for a job, it's only natural to have some competition, from a candidate pool. The average number of people who tend to apply for a single job, while it's 118%, roughly only 20% of those individuals actually get invited to an interview, right? So only 20% of that 118 on average actually gets invited for an interview. So the next time, if you're wondering, how many applicants get interviews, it's probably roughly 1 out of every 5 candidates gets selected for an interview, okay? So, but let's start here. Why are interviews even important, right? If it's really because if you think about it, the hiring decisions that companies have to make are very critical to the health of really any good organization. And the wrong hiring decision can be very costly to that company. Those costs can include things such as financial loss, which are wages and salary, lost or impacted relationships, a decline in learning and development, decrease in productivity and morale, and then you have to turn around and you have the recruitment of a new hire, right? So the cost of a wrong hire can be almost 2.5 times that of an employee's annual salary. So this is definitely something that employers must get right due to the costs that are associated with making a hiring decision. The importance of good hiring, as you can see, is that almost 75% of all litigations against corporations today involve the employment disputes. So another ramification in the hiring decisions of making a poor decision can also present legal factors for organizations. So employment-related lawsuits are the fastest growing type of civil case in the United States. As I said, almost 75% litigations against corporations today involve some level of employment disputes. and over 40% of all employment practice claims are filed against private employers who have between 15 and 100 employees. So companies need to use certain types of hiring practices to help mitigate the risk of making a bad hiring decision. And one of those practices that mitigates risk is a behavioral interview, because behavioral interviews are often seen as an objective and reliable, and more reliable than traditional interviews, because they focus on significant examples that you as a candidate present rather than hypothetical situations, right? So they can really help employers identify candidates who have the necessary skills, background, and experience who will potentially qualify or excel in this role. And so this also helps companies find a good fit. So behavioral interviews are a key way that companies are mitigating risk associated with some of these legal actions that have been taking place. So now that we kind of know why interviews are even important, let's talk about how you prepare for an interview first. And let's focus on the external factors, okay? So before we go deeper, I want to talk about, from an external standpoint, you have two primary tasks that you should do as you prepare. Number one is your research, okay? You got to do your homework into the company, right? You want to research the company. You want to understand everything you can about the organization. You want to review employee reviews. There's websites like Glassdoor that are very common that provide some intel, but certainly you want to research the company. Second thing you want to do is study the job description. And this is where you can really understand what the role is all about. You want to make sure that you know specifically what type of skills and backgrounds are needed, because this will help you start to anticipate some of the questions that the employer may ask you. Now, you never truly know what questions are going to be asked of you, but studying the job description and understanding the qualifications and the expectations of the role will give you some clues as to what potentially the employer will ask you during the interview, okay? But you want to make sure that as you review the job description, that you start to think about what it is that you have specifically that aligns with the position, right? Because at times, candidates are selected within a candidate pool because they might have a few of the qualifications. They might not have everything that a job description is asking for, but you might have some things. So reviewing it will allow you to begin to make some connections between your current and previous skill set and what this position may ask you to do. Oh, I didn't even realize the animation did come up, but yes, there you are. Research the company and study the job description. Okay, so let's talk internal. Okay, first we have getting your stories together. Okay, when you think about your personal experiences, you really need to identify roughly up to maybe 3 to 5, but 5 good examples, right? 5 good stories of projects or instances where you had some significant contributions to the work that you were doing. But those 5 examples are stories that you can use and customize them, certainly, to answer questions that are going to be presented to you during the interview, okay? But if you have those examples down, you can start to study those examples and they become almost like a script, right? If you think of like an actor or an actress, when you watch a movie or a TV show, what you see is their performance after studying a script of what they had to say. And usually the better the performance means the better they understand their script. So you'll want to study your answers and examples to key questions so that you could be a better performer as an interview candidate, okay? The next area that you want to prepare is really practice mock interviewing, right? Practicing answering behavioral questions with either a mentor or a coach. Certainly this program offers that, and I know they do a wonderful job of working with all other individuals who are preparing for upcoming interviews. That's something that I do as well, but for you, practicing can really help you get more comfortable with the type of questions you might be asked, and they provide you an opportunity to receive feedback on your answers. That's what you want to get. You want to get feedback so you can address your flaws, your weaknesses, but also build up confidence, have some reinforcement on the work that you're doing so that you can feel better going into the interview, all right? So now that we understand how to prepare, let's talk about what a behavioral interview actually is. A behavioral interview is a type of job interview where the interviewer is going to ask you questions that are designed to elicit specific examples of how the interviewee or the candidate has demonstrated certain behaviors or skills in the past, okay? The idea behind the behavior interview is that your past behavior provides a good predictor of future behavior, okay? Employers use specific questions that opens the window to how you've performed in the past, which helps them determine or predict how you will perform in the future. So think of it like this. I know I have this illustration, and to everyone on here, I do apologize. I am not the most graphically advanced individual, so I tried my best. So please be patient with me, but hopefully you can follow along, right? So the answers you provide as a candidate, think of them like a large data set, right? Every answer that you give is a set of data, okay? And the person that's interviewing you, right, they're listening to your responses and they are starting to receive that data as they're listening to it. And as they receive the data, they begin to analyze this data, right? So their mind is using some sort of mental software like Python, and they're starting to analyze the data within your answers. And as you continue to speak and as you continue to provide your answer, their mind begins to use an internal data visualization tool like Tableau, let's say, and it helps them begin to visualize and predict your future performance in a role that you're applying for. So if you can imagine, you're sitting there, you're answering a question, the person who's interviewing you, while they're listening to you, their mind is predicting your future performance, either in a good or bad way. Unfortunately, that's the truth. Sometimes based upon your responses and how you're answering questions, that data visualization does not always work in your favor. So what you're trying to do is help them predict positive future performance. You want them to visualize you doing a great job in the position that you're applying for. That's why it's important to understand the role you're applying for, because that allows your answers to be closely aligned to what the job entails, right? You want this person to see you clearly doing this job that you haven't done before, nor have they seen you do, but you want them to visualize you doing it in a professional way, in an efficient way, in a creative way, but being able to display the characteristics and traits and skills needed to do the job well, okay? Because as I said earlier, this is a costly decision, right? There's a lot of factors involved here. They want to make the right decision. And so they have to feel confident and feel good about your ability to do this job. And so your answers are the key to helping them visualize what your future performance will look like, okay? So now that we understand the basis of the interview, what about the questions, right? The questions are typically, open-ended, but a behavioral question by definition is a question that aims at learning about your past behaviors in a specific professional or academic situation, right? So it asks the interviewee, you as a candidate, to describe a situation that you've encountered, the actions that you took in response to that situation, and what the outcomes of those actions were, right? How you have behaved in certain situations in the past will give a hiring manager clues on how you're going to behave in similar situations when working for them in the future. Going back to what I just said about data visualization, they are predicting your future performance, right? And you can recognize a behavioral question by something like, tell me about a time, right? As soon as you hear that, tell me about a time, give me a situation when, provide me an example of, et cetera, et cetera. These will types of questions tell you immediately that they are asking you a behavioral question, okay, or within the behavioral interview. So the behavioral question design is basically, or how the behavioral questions are constructed is it takes a competency, right, plus an open-ended question, and that equals a behavioral interview question, right? So what are competencies, right? What does that mean that a competency plus a question equals a behavioral interview question? Well, competencies include things like leadership, business acumen, relationship management, communication, teamwork, problem solving. Those are competencies. Those are specific skills or competencies that an organization wants to evaluate within their candidate pool. They want to know, how good is your problem solving skills? They need to know what type of team player you are. Are you able to collaborate, right? And as I said, questions as being open-ended are usually phrased like, tell me about a time when, describe for me a situation when, give me an example of a time. These questions will force you to give a specific situational response, right? You don't want to be general with your answers. And that is a common mistake that many candidates make. They don't recognize that the question is asking them for a very specific example, and they go into too many general details within their answer. And to be honest with you, as someone who has made a lot of hiring decisions, and I've been in a lot of hiring decision discussions, I have seen a number of good quality candidates be denied for a position because of their interview. And one of the primary reasons was the fact that someone felt that they were not specific in their answers. You could have all the qualifications, you can have a great education background, you can be highly skilled, but in an interview, if you fail to be specific when the question is prompting you to do so, that can go against you negatively in a hiring decision. And although you might be the most qualified, someone might be dissatisfied with your interview and say, you know, I like this person, but I really didn't get a good feel for their responses because they were too general or they were not specific enough. And I've seen it happen with my own eyes and ears. And I've actually, felt that way too. So you want to make sure that when you have a behavioral question, that you take full advantage of being as specific as possible. And we're going to talk more about how to answer it, but this is just ways in which you can identify in your mind when you're being asked this question. Okay. So let's get more specific though. What are some common behavioral interview questions? Okay. Now, within these questions, I want to see if you all can identify any of the competencies that are being asked. If you want, you can type it into the chat, but the first question is, tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult team member, okay? That's the question. Tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult team member. If anyone can interpret or see or identify what is a competency that is being asked within this question. I'll do the first one, okay? I see someone mention something. Communication, very true. Yes, correct. Communication is being asked here. Conflict resolution, okay? Teamwork and interpersonal skills. These are different competencies being identified within this question. The second question is, give me an example of a time when you had to solve a complex problem, okay? This question here is starting to test your critical thinking skills. It's starting to test your analytical skills, your creativity and innovation, and decision-making, okay? The third question, tell me about a time when you went above and beyond in your job. Okay. Even a question like this, going above and beyond in your job, what is it that they're really trying to understand about you? Well, they want to know if you're proactive, right? They want to know if you're achievement oriented. Okay. They're trying to identify if you have good customer service skills, right? Let's say it's a customer oriented position, like a business development role, right? And you're going to be working with clients, and they want someone who is not just going to do the minimum for their clients, but really go above and beyond to ensure a good customer relationship. They want to know, how are you proactive? What type of customer service you provide, okay? Fourth one, describe a time when you failed and what you learned from this experience, right? They're asking you to be vulnerable here, but the competency is, how self-aware are you? Are you resilient, right? You failed at something, but they want to test your resiliency to see how you bounce back from something that didn't go as expected. They're also trying to see, what is your learning and development like, right? And your decision making, because initially you did something that didn't work. What type of new decision making processes did you incorporate to ensure success the next time around? All right. And finally, number 5, give me an example of a time when you had to adapt to a new situation. Again, adaptability, flexibility, change management, right? These are competencies within this question. And so as you can see, while the question like number 5 doesn't say, we'd like to learn about your change management skills, tell us about a time in which you had to adapt to a new situation. It won't say it that way. It doesn't always identify clearly what the competency is within the question, but it's in there. And you, as the candidate, need to recognize what type of skill, what type of competency is this behavioral question asking. All right. So I think we have a good handle on the questions now. Let's talk about how we build an answer strategy. Okay. So I think everyone is pretty familiar, or hopefully somewhat familiar, with the STAR method. But we're going to go from STAR to SARL. And I know it doesn't make sense, right? It's like, what is SARL? It's not even a word that you can remember, and I get it. But I know the STAR method is tried and true, and most interview coaches and experts will probably stay close to this, and rightfully so. It works, right? It gives you a good framework to build your answer. But my thinking is that one of the goals that you have in any interview is to separate yourself from everyone else, right? Let's think about those 118 other candidates that you're competing against for one role, right? You're one of the few that was selected for an interview, and now you have a smaller population, but you're trying to stand out. You're trying to separate yourself from everyone. And the last thing you want to do is somewhat sound the same as other candidates, right? It's good to mix it up a little bit. And so that's why I have provided a new approach called SARL. And so what does SARL even mean? Okay, well, I'll explain. So similar to STAR, you start off with your situation. It's pretty self-explanatory, but this is just where you start to describe the setting, okay? And when you're describing the situation, right, you're just giving me enough to know kind of where you're at. Where is this taking place, right? There was a time in which I was working on a new data project that was going to analyze our customer purchasing trends. Great. Now I understand, right? That's an example of a situation, right? The situation is a small portion of your entire response, and it should be about 5 to 10%. Now, the action is where you want to spend most of your time, right? This is where the rubber meets the road, as people like to say. And you're going to talk about what you specifically contributed in this example. You want to get as specific as possible. You need to highlight your approach towards the actions that you took. If you were good at something, if one of your actions is actually one of your skill sets, maybe it's communication, right? You want to let them know that. You need to not just say what you did, but sometimes it's important to identify how well you did or how well you performed in this particular action, right? You can't assume that the person interviewing you is going to always interpret your answer the way you want them to. Sometimes candidates make the mistake of believing that the person they're speaking with is going to interpret the information the same way that they understand it based upon their answer. And you can't assume that. You have to sometimes tell the interviewer or the hiring manager that you were successful, that you were good, that I have advanced skills in X, Y, and Z. Let them hear you say that. So that way they start to visualize you performing that skill set in the way you described, okay? But you really want to discuss yourself and your contributions in this section. And so that's why it should take roughly 70 to 80% of your answer, because you have a good portion of time to spend here laying out your actions, okay? And the result, again, it's pretty quick and easy. You know, were you successful at getting the project off the ground? Was your manager happy? Did you complete it on time? Et cetera, et cetera. Results do not take very long to talk about. So again, roughly 5 to 10%. One thing to think about when you're sharing results is that facts and figures, meaning don't just say, I completed my project on time and my manager was happy. You could say something like, I completed my project 3 days ahead of time, which was able to save an additional 14 hours of labor, which my manager was very pleased about. Now I have a totally different understanding of how much time you saved, which equated to a certain amount of labor hours that were saved as well. It's much more impactful. So if you can include any type of facts or figures or data within your results, it helps your interviewee or interviewer better understand the impact of your response. But let's talk about learn, right? I have it in parentheses because it's not a requirement within your answer. Sometimes you can use it, you don't always have to, okay? But what you learn from your example is a very key piece, because what it allows you to do is highlight something about yourself that perhaps you didn't get to cover in your original answer, okay? One of the weakest parts of any interview answer, if I've been coaching many, many candidates over the years, one of the weakest parts of their answers consistently is the conclusion. Sometimes when you're answering a question, you start off with some very good momentum, you have a lot of confidence, you feel good about what you're saying. It starts to trail a little bit, and you don't always even recognize when you should end your response. But if you think about it, if this question is really helping me understand you and your performance better, and you ended talking about the example and not so much yourself, it doesn't have the same level of significance. But if you talked about what you learned from this example, I'll give you, and here's an example, right? So as I said, I completed the project on time. We finished 3 days ahead, which saved us 13 hours of labor, and my manager was very pleased. What I learned from this situation is that whenever taking on a very large project, prioritization is very key in order to ensure successful completion within the proper time frame. So I always try to prioritize my work ahead of time to help me ensure that I'm able to complete my work ahead of when it's due. So as you can see there, I refocused your thought on me and how I approach not just the example that I gave, but future situations, because I told you that before I start a new project, I always begin to prioritize my work ahead of time to ensure successful completion. Go back to my diagram of the the data visualization. As I'm telling you that, you're starting to visualize what I would do in the future, and you're thinking, okay, when David gets a new project, he's going to take time to prioritize, and he's going to do his best to finish on time. I start to see him as someone who is organized, someone who is proactive. So that's why I like ending my answers sometimes with what I learned, not just to tell you actually what I learned from it, but really to help you see something specific about me that I feel is important for you to understand. Okay. So let's put this into practice. And I need one volunteer to come off of mute. Hopefully you can. But if someone would speak up and be a volunteer, I'd love to have someone practice answering a question with me. Is anyone out there willing to do so? I see Jack raised his hand. Can you come off mute, Jack? Oh, let me see if I can help you with that.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, is this Jack?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jack, for being a volunteer. So,
nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise, sir. So what we're going to do here is we're going to practice answering a sample interview question, okay?
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to listen to your response, okay?
Okay.
All right, Jack. Describe a situation in which you had to overcome an obstacle to complete a task or project, and explain how you did it.
So your question is overcome an obstacle about so sorry, I didn't hear your question clearly.
No, you're fine. So the question is, tell me about a time in which you had to overcome an obstacle to complete a project or a task, something you were doing.
Okay. So okay, in my project, what I can recall is so in my project, once I was asked to develop a Shiny app. It's a graphical interface application. But at that time, I had no experience for a web application. So it was challenging at the beginning, but I didn't want to give up. So the first measure I took was to I searched online for some basic tutorial to get a sense of what the web application it is and what basic skills I need. Then after I know what skills I need, then I turn to the friends around me who is an expert in this field. Then I told my friend my situation. It was I mean urgent job I had to overcome. I couldn't give up, and I scheduled a regular weekly meeting with my friend to ask him questions, how to develop this app, and it took me about 1 week. Of course, during no, took me about 1 month. Of course, during the 1 month, I had many technical difficulties, but I have to most of the time I have to learn by myself because my friend were not responsible to help me all the time. So basically, ask guidance from my friends, and then for the rest I learn by myself. And finally, I made it. I developed the app successfully.
And what did you learn from this experience, Jack?
HTML. You mean the experience, the technical what I learned from technically, or something else?
What would you learn about yourself?
Myself is how to, during this situation, what I learned, the most important thing what I learned is when I face something totally new, how to think of a strategy to borrow resources, to ask for help from the people around me. That's the most important. How to think of a strategy to integrate the resources available to me to overcome the problem.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to give you a round of applause, Jack. Great job there. Hopefully everybody else can cheer you on, but I just want to thank you first so much for being a volunteer and jumping on there with me. So you can go back on mute, and I'll start to provide you a little bit of feedback and break it down. So thank you again, Jack. But the question was, essentially, I asked him, how did you overcome an obstacle for a task that you were trying to complete? Okay. And what Jack did, he gave me a great situation. He said that he had a project that he was trying to develop, sounded like a new app. But his obstacle was that he had no experience in creating this web application. So clearly identified the situation. It didn't take him very long. It was a short part of his answer, but it gave me exactly what I needed to know to understand, right? And he shared that this was a challenge, but he didn't want to give up. Now, instead of saying, I didn't want to give up, this is where you can start to speak about your resiliency, right? Because that's what this question is asking. It certainly wants to know about his problem-solving ability, but it wants to know, are you resilient, right? He could say, and I'm a very resilient person. And so when I faced this obstacle, I was not going to give up until I figured it out. Now, by saying it that way, this helps the hiring manager see you as a resilient professional. I know he said I didn't want to give up, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'll interpret it the way that maybe he intended it, right? So then he walked through the steps that he took. He said, first, I searched online for tutorials to get web applications. Now, if you think about that, he said, first, I did some searching online. Well, for me, what I would want to make sure that I share is that I'm very resourceful. So I began to search online for a number of tutorials about web applications and different websites that gave me an idea of the skills that I needed. But I want to mention that I'm resourceful, that I know how to find out information that I need to know when I don't have it available to me. And after he found out the skills he needed, he went to his friends around him who had these skills. I might say I went to my internal network and talked to different professionals in my network who I know had these skills. I like to make it sound a little bit more professional, make it seem like I have a strong network of individuals with expertise and skills who I can turn to whenever I need to. And then Jack shared that he scheduled a weekly meeting to ask his friend questions on how to develop this app. Now, that was a key moment to where he might have been able to start to share, in addition to scheduling the meetings, Jack wasn't just asking his friend questions, he was probably taking notes, he was going back and doing additional research. So I would share that. I would say after every meeting, I would break down the notes that I took during my discussion with my friend. I would do additional research so that each time that I met with this person, I was more informed and ready to learn more advanced skills that I needed for this application, right? All Jack told me was that he scheduled a meeting to ask questions, but he didn't go too in depth about what he did with that information. And so I would advise Jack or someone to make sure that when you're describing that type of action, that you go deeper with what you specifically did, because I know Jack was taking notes. I know he was doing more research after that meeting was over. But again, if you don't tell me that, I might not interpret it that way as the hiring manager. So you want to help me visualize what you did during those meetings, okay? Then it said it took him about a month. He asked for guidance and he was able to finally complete it, right? The result doesn't take that long. And then I prompted him to say, well, what did you learn about that? Now, again, you probably won't be asked that from the hiring manager. They might not ask you what you learned, but I did it so you all could hear what he shared there. And he said that I learned that I'm capable of learning something new. I know how to create a strategy when doing so. And that is exactly what I would have said. I would have said that from this experience, I learned that I can take on learning new different types of software. I know how to create a strategy to help me build that learning. I know how to work within my network, and this will help me in future situations where I need to learn something new. That's great, because guess what? You might be applying for a job that you don't have any experience on certain software that might be required with that job. And that's okay. But if you can demonstrate to the hiring manager that you're capable of learning something new and you're very resourceful and resilient in doing it, that gives them confidence that you can figure it out. So great job again, Jack. Thank you for participating. I appreciate you putting your answer together, and hopefully that feedback made sense to everyone there. So now let's just talk about something real quick. I know we're coming up, I think, on probably the last 10 minutes or so of my presentation, but what happens if you get stuck, right? What happens if your mind just goes blank, all right? Believe it or not, and to be honest with you, I know I'm sitting up here giving the presentation, but I've been on interviews myself and I've been asked a question that I just went completely blank on or didn't know how to answer. And it can happen. So you need to be prepared and have a strategy to approach those situations, right? First, I want you all to always know that it is truly okay for you to pause and take some time before you respond. You never have to rush into your answer, okay? In an interview, when someone is asking you a question, your mind is immediately processing that question and thinking through what you want to say, okay? But if you don't have all your thoughts together, it's okay to pause and take a few seconds. Now, if you're not comfortable with just the silence, which I understand, but trust me, it's okay. One thing you can do, especially if you get a very hard question, is you can acknowledge that and ask for more time. You can say something to the effect of, that's a very good question. Do you mind if I think about it for a second? They're always going to tell you, go right ahead. Sure, no problem, okay? Because hiring managers care more about what you say, not how long it took you to start saying it, right? They're not going to penalize you for thinking for 10 seconds before you answer. They care about the content of your response. So if you need to think about it, go ahead. You have the right of way to do so, right? Now, let's just say you get a question and you have no example for it, right? You've never experienced that. It could be something like, tell me about a time in which you had to deal with a disagreement with a coworker. And let's just say you have great coworkers and you've never had a disagreement before and you don't have an example. Well, guess what? You still have to give an answer. No matter what, you always have to answer the question. You can never say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have an example for that. I've never experienced that before. That's not going to cut it. You need to have an answer. So what this does is it allows you to give a hypothetical situation, all right? What you say is, I actually don't recall a time in which that happened to me in the past. However, if I did encounter that in the future, here's what I would do, okay? So if you've never encountered a difficult coworker, you could say that and say, I've been very fortunate to have great coworkers in the past, and I have not had a disagreement before. However, if I did have a disagreement with a coworker, I would immediately try to address it and understand how we could resolve the situation. I would go to my coworker and ask them if there's anything that I've done that may have upset them or have caused them any frustration. And once I understand the background, I can begin to work towards a solution with them. But I'm a very solution-oriented person, so I would be proactive in approaching this coworker to see how we can work towards resolving this matter quickly. See, so there, I just gave you a great hypothetical answer, not based on something I experienced, but based on how I would approach this situation in the future, because that's what your answers are designed to do. So even though I don't have an example, that's not a bad thing, because guess what? I still gave you what you're looking for to understand what is David going to do when he faces a tough situation with one of his peers on this project team. Well, I know he's going to be proactive. He's going to ask them, is there anything he could have done better? And he's going to work towards a solution. That's exactly what you want to do. So whenever you get stuck, just remember you can take time to think. You can ask for more time. And if you don't have an example, you still need to give an answer, but you can give a hypothetical response, okay? All right. So again, interviewing is where you really are trying to undoubtedly stand out in the crowd, right? The crowd of all the other candidates, right? And so just some specific things to kind of help you think about how you can stand out in the crowd. Obviously, you want to give specific examples and stories, right? You need to highlight your unique skills and strengths. Make sure that when you're highlighting this, that you align your skills and strengths with the requirements of the job. This will help the interviewer understand how you can add value to the organization and what makes you different from other candidates. The next thing you need to do is emphasize your passion and enthusiasm for the role and company. Demonstrating your genuine interest and passion for the company will make you stand out as a candidate who's committed to the job and the organization's goals. Another thing that you have to do in the interview process is ask questions at the end, okay? They'll always save time or a little bit of time for you to ask questions at the end of the interview. So you want to prepare at least 3 to 5 questions going into your interview that you might be able to ask them. Now, you don't know how much time you'll get. They might only have enough time for you to ask 1 question, but at least have 3 to 5 in priority that you would want to ask them at the end, right? You might want to know more about the company, about the role, about the team, about them, right? One common question that I usually keep in my back pocket is when I'm talking to the hiring manager, I would say something like, I would love to get your perspective on what success looks like in this role, right? I want to hear them tell me what specifically they think it takes to be successful in this job. Not what's on the job description, but what's that one thing that they feel it takes to be successful, right? Another question could be, how would you describe the current team dynamics? I'd like to know about the team a little bit. You know, what does this team look like? Do they have a good culture? Do they work well with one another? Okay. A third question that I kind of keep handy, or just to give you an example, is, can you tell, this is me talking to the hiring manager, but I would ask them, can you tell me what you enjoy most about working here at this company? This is a great question to not only hear what people enjoy about the company, but it shows an interest in the person who you're talking to, right? I want to learn something about you. I've talked about myself for the last 90 or the last 45 minutes, you know, and so let me take a few minutes to learn about you, okay? One other thing that sometimes it's not necessary. I don't think it has as much impact as some people might say, but I will include it, is after the interview is over, you can always try to follow up with a thank you note or an email. It's a way to show your appreciation for their time and consideration. I don't think it will determine whether or not you get the job, but it does have a way of helping you stand out from others, okay? Sometimes following up in an email after the interview's over lets you reiterate a few things about yourself that you want to make sure they understood, okay? So those are just some tools and tactics and ways in which you can stand out in the crowd. But before we go, I'm going to give you my secret formula, okay? And as you can see in that graphic, I've wrote it out for you. And it might be a little complicated to understand. So I'll break it down. And actually, that's not my formula. I don't even know what that is, but I do have a formula for interviewing. And my formula for success is connection times 3 plus value equals desire. Okay, connection times 3 plus value equals desire. What does that even mean? Well, the connection times 3 is there's 3 connections you have to make: a connection with the company, a connection with the role, and a connection with the person. Now, you connect with the company based on your research prior to the interview. As I said earlier on, you want to research the company, you want to look at employee reviews, you want to see what's on their website, what's in the news, learn as much as you can about the company, be as familiar as you can about it. Your connection with the role means studying the job description, looking at other companies that are hiring for the same type of role, right? If you're interviewing for a senior business analyst, see what other companies are hiring for this position. Look at their job descriptions. There might be things in their descriptions that you could include within your answers, but learn as much as you can about the role. Now, the connection with the person. How do you connect with the person who's interviewing you? Remember, as a hiring manager, I'm interviewing someone trying to evaluate, do I want to work with this individual? I certainly want to know if they have the skills or experience, but I need to know, do I want to work with them on a daily basis? So you want to be personable, you want to be professional, you want to have a personality, you want to show enthusiasm. That's how you can connect with somebody, okay? And then the most important part is the value, connection plus value. What is the value? This is what you share about yourself in your responses. This is where you build up someone's confidence in you as a candidate. Think about a job offer like an investment decision, okay? A hiring manager has a position that pays $50,000, and they're trying to evaluate a candidate pool of who's the best investment option for this role. And for someone to invest in you, they need to have a lot of confidence in your future ability. So your value is the indicator of what my confidence in you will be. So your responses need to add value about yourself. And the more value you provide about yourself, the greater my confidence will be in that if I make an investment, if I offer you this job, I'm going to get a good ROI, return on my investment, right? If I pay you $50,000, I'm hoping to get more in return than what I'm paying you. Just like if you invested in a stock, right? You want to get more in return. You don't want to lose money, you want to gain it, right? So if you make a connection plus add value, it equals a greater desire for someone to want to hire you. Okay, so that's my formula. And that concludes my presentation.